Alright, our next topic of discussion is an important one. It is about props. Earlier in this video, I have mentioned that components are reusable, right? So you can create a component that returns any JSX you want. So at any part of the application, you just have to write a function which returns you an JSX, right? So for example, let's say we need to reuse the welcome component, which we have done in the earlier stages. So I did show you by calling the component n number of times, right? So this is one way of reusing. So now, do you see one thing that we are kind of duplicating the stuff, right? But in some sense, like in the example that I gave you about the side nav. So in that side nav, we had a left side nav. Assume that you also had a right side nav, but with a different content in it. So how do you go about dynamically kind of changing the content within the component, but the styling or the way the component is remains the same? How do you go about doing that is when we use props. Okay, so now let's assume that you have welcome here, right? So in this welcome, assume that I'm taking a parameter. So the parameter in React, we call it as props. Okay, so whatever is being passed is called a props or a property. So now assume that I want to greet three people. Okay, so if you want to greet, okay, as of now we have four people over here, so the four welcomes, right? Let's say that I kind of remove these two. Okay, and now over here what we'll do is, like simple JavaScript functions, how do you pass arguments? It's the same over here. Okay, so assume that I name a property called as name equals, and I go about giving my name. Okay, so this is one thing. Now if I go over here, there's props over here, right? If I want to access this props which is being passed here as name, right, what I'll do is I'll give hello. Now if I tell props dot name, this won't work. Okay, why? As you can see over here, it gives this way. Okay, what you have to do is, since it is JSX, we'll have to put it in braces. Now if you see, you can see the name, right? So this is the argument which is passed from here to here. Yeah, we are passing it as a props and you're calling it props dot. Here you can have any name actually, but the convention is you go about using props. So whatever props attribute name you have over here, you can go about using that. Assume that I want to have, I can change this to first name. Okay, I'll put this to first name, and then I'll have one more called as last name. Okay, now you can access. Now if you see, you'll get an error, or okay, it handles it because there's nothing as such. So now if I give first underscore name, you see name coming in. Okay, and then again props dot last name. Yeah, so you see pretty much things working. Now I had one more person. Okay, let's say he had some different properties, like first name is BCD and last name is XYZ. Yeah, you're able to see we are making use of the same component welcome, but we're trying to pass in content in a different manner. Yeah, so instead of writing one piece of code like this welcome JS so many times and replacing this with your hard coded values, what you can go about doing is create a component as such like this, and then we can just call it as many times as you want with dynamically passing these props. Okay, this is how we go about using props. But one thing about props is that you cannot actually change these values, right? So these are immutable. So now if I want to change the value of props dot first name, I won't be able to do it. Okay, so it's just that props are something that we can pass from one to another. Okay, it's like your JavaScript plain function you're passing as argument, and you're making use of argument somewhere else. That is what props stands here in React. Okay, so now let's go through some theory if you want. um So now what you see over here is a props is a short for properties as told earlier, right? So they pass between one component to other. So it flows in a unidirectional way from parent to child. So what you saw over here was that who was the parent? The app component was the parent and the child was the welcome component, right? So now it also says props are immutable. We cannot modify the props from inside the component, right? I told you this. So if you want to modify this props, like if you try to assign props dot first name equals something, it throws an error. Okay, it's not possible using props. Okay, so we use props to pass data from parent component to child component, and child component cannot change its value as it is immutable, right? Because the owner of the property is your parent. Here your app component is holding the property names, right? First name, last name. So you cannot change it in the welcome. You can just make use of those, is what it's trying to tell you. So as told earlier, it is just like your functional arguments in JavaScript, right? So this is one thing. So I have told you how about like using the props, right? So if you have a component, you just give any property for it. It can be any name. So you can give name equals and whatever, like, or your property name equals the whatever attribute or the props that you want to pass it to the next component. This is about props. Okay. So with respect to the props property, you're not allowed to kind of change it under any circumstances. Nevertheless, props is a great feature in React, and any practical React application will definitely make use of props. So even the props are immutable, you know how we can kind of traverse or move the data from one component to another. So now a question might arise, how if we want to change things like uh, props are immutable, right? So there must be something that is mutable in sense. So that is where your state comes in.